One promise changed everything. A German shepherd's silent oath. Ethan Cole was no stranger to danger. 12 years on the force, 7 with K9 patrol. He'd faced high-speed chases, armed suspects, and nights that tested his soul. Through it all, there was Ranger, his German shepherd, loyal as breath. But nothing prepared him for the storm at Gate D20. It started with a little girl in a blue coat. She ran straight to Ranger, clutching him with a desperation that silenced the concourse. And then, with eyes that looked far older than her years, she whispered, "Don't let this flight go. Something bad will happen." In that moment, Ethan made a choice. To listen, to act, even when logic said otherwise. Hours later, when the engineers revealed a fracture in the plane's wing that could have killed hundreds, Ethan knew. Ranger had been right, and the girl had seen something no one else could. That promise, to believe her, to trust his partner, would carry them into the darkest days yet. Days when 2 men with 2 bags nearly brought an airport to ruin, and only the bond between a child, a cop, and a shepherd stood in the way. The rain came down in long, tired strokes that blurred the world beyond the terminal glass. It softened the planes to smudges of silver and turned the runway lights into trembling stars. Ethan Cole, 38, veteran K9 handler, walked the concourse with a cup of coffee cooling in his hand, and Ranger, a thick-coated German shepherd with amber eyes, moving in step at his left knee. They had been partners long enough to read each other without trying. Ethan knew the small catalogue of sounds Ranger made when he caught a child's laughter, the way his ears pitched when he scented pretzels, the patient sigh he gave when an admirer reached for a photo. Ranger knew the press of Ethan's fingers that meant hold, the soft good that meant you can breathe, the brief stillness that meant I need you sharp now. Atlanta International hummed around them, rolling suitcases, the small thunder of a stroller over metal grates, a voice from the ceiling inviting someone named Hartley to proceed to Gate 05. It was the kind of afternoon shift that usually slid by, eyes up, presence steady, the comfort of routine. Ethan liked that. Routine meant nobody went home with a story that hurt. They rounded a bend toward D20, just as a gust pushed rain sideways and rattled the glass like a handful of nails. Ranger halted. Not a pause, not curiosity. The kind of halt that traveled through muscle to bone. Ears up, tail wired straight, nose flaring once, twice. Ethan's own body answered before his mind did. He stopped, the coffee going weightless in his hand. "What is it, bud?" he asked, low. Ranger didn't look at him. The dog's gaze cut ahead, past the milling passengers, to the window seats along the glass. A pulse of unease slid under Ethan's ribs. In 7 years with Ranger, this posture had never been cheap or wrong. He shifted the leash from his palm to his fingers, looser, more ready, and scanned the gate. Beyond the glass, the rain smeared the fuselage at D20 into a streaked coin of light. Inside, everything held that shine. A storm gives to airports, faces lit by phones, coats damp at the shoulders, a toddler asleep against her mother's chest. Normal, all of it, until Ethan noticed the fixed stillness of a small figure by the window. A girl. 8, maybe. Blue raincoat, beaded with water. She wasn't watching cartoons or tapping a sneaker against the chair. She was watching the airplane like someone watching the horizon for smoke. Ranger's breath deepened, a low shiver in his chest. Ethan felt it through the leash. "Easy," he murmured. "We're listening." He approached with the slow, steady gait that calms people before they know they're being calmed. Ranger stayed close, head level, a working dog in a crowd with the kind of poise that made children smile. The girl didn't smile. When she saw Ranger, something inside her loosened, the smallest crack in the mask of fear, and she slid off the chair. She crossed the few feet between them quickly, as if distance might change its mind, and wrapped her arms around Ranger's neck. Her face pressed into the thick ruff, the blue hood collapsing against his shoulder. "Hey there," Ethan said softly, crouching so his eyes were level with hers. "He's friendly." Her voice was tiny, a thread pulled through the storm. "Please don't let this flight take off." Behind her, a woman startled to her feet, mother by the look of the tired bun, and the way her hand went to her chest before it reached for her daughter. "I'm so sorry, officer," she said. "She gets nervous." "She didn't mean—" Ranger didn't move. His whole body held a focused quiet. Ethan trusted more than most things. The child's small hands had found the brass edge of his harness. Fingers splayed over the stamped letters that read, "Police K9," as if the metal itself could promise safety. "What's your name?" Ethan asked. She shook her head. The words came in a rush, not to him so much as to the dog. "Don't let it go, please." The mother reached them, breath catching. "Sweetheart, you can't." "Officer, I'm sorry. She's had nightmares. We've been trying to—" "It's okay," Ethan said. But the line between protocol and instinct tightened in him. You don't ground a plane because a child is afraid. You don't ignore a partner who has never cried wolf. Ranger's nostrils worked, tasting the air. The dog's tail never touched his hock. "Where's your flight going?" Ethan asked the mother. "Seattle," she said. "D20. Of course it was. The overhead announced pre-boarding for the same flight, a cheerful voice that sounded wrong against the look in the girl's eyes. The look wasn't turbulence fear. It was aftermath fear, the kind people wear when they've already seen the wreck and are standing in the echo. The girl's cheek stayed pressed to Ranger's fur. Ethan could feel the tremble in her shoulders through the dog. "Okay," he said to Ranger, but also to the child. "Okay." There are choices that take a paragraph to explain and half a second to make. Ethan rose, keyed his shoulder mic, and kept his voice level. "Unit K9 at D20. Request maintenance inspection on the aircraft before pushback. K9 behavioral alert and passenger concern." A beat of static. Then his supervisor's voice. Steady, skeptical, present. "Copy, Ethan. You sure?" "I'm sure enough." He felt the gate area tighten around the announcement, the way a room tightens around bad news. People looked up. Some hearts sped. Some tempers did. The gate agent's smile faltered, then returned in the professional shape designed to hold a crowd in place. Ethan spoke quietly with her, gave her enough to move without giving away the girl who still held his dog like a piece of driftwood in dark water. Maintenance arrived with rolling tool cases and practiced calm. They disappeared down the jet bridge. The room took on that held breath temperature airports get when time has been changed without their consent. Ranger sat, but it wasn't rest. It was a coiled obedience, eyes cutting from the window to the child and back again. Minutes have a different shape when you're waiting for the thing you prayed not to be right about. The mother guided her daughter to a pair of chairs by the wall. The girl didn't cry. She just kept her fingers hooked under Ranger's collar, as far as the leash allowed, an anchor line across the small space between terror and trust. Ethan stayed at the glass. Rain made the tarmac look like a river running the wrong way. In it, the plane was a pale fish, too beautiful to break. The first mechanic returned. Uncertainty lived in his face. He spoke to the gate agent, then called someone else. Ethan felt that old, cold place open in his chest, the one every cop carries for the moment things turn. Sergeant Willis came up beside him, a broad silhouette reflected in the glass. "You put your name on this," he said, without blame or praise. "I put Rangers," Ethan said. Willis grunted. "That's the better name anyway." More minutes later, the head engineer emerged, a man who looked like he'd given his best years to aluminum and air and still kept a human heart. He gestured to Ethan and Willis down the jet bridge. They followed him into the bright hush of the threshold, where the terminal becomes aircraft, to a panel of wing skin opened like a careful wound. "Standard checks were clean," the engineer said. He tapped a gloved knuckle against a rib of composite near the wing root. "We went deeper. Found a hairline fracture in the joint laminate. You can't eyeball it. You have to know to look and have the equipment to see it." "Could it hold?" Willis asked. "At altitude? In turbulence?" The man's mouth flattened. "Maybe. Until it didn't." The rain sounded louder in that small space. Ethan pictured the girl's hands in Ranger's fur, the way the dog's ears cut the air like antennas. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, and felt his pulse settle into something steadier, heavier, gratitude with a seam of fear running through it. They walked back up the bridge. The announcement came. Neutral, tidy. "This flight has been cancelled due to maintenance." A soft wave went through the gate. Groans, relief, the small chaos of rebooking. The girl sat very still, and then exhaled, one long breath like a swimmer breaking the surface. Ethan crossed to them. Up close, the child's eyes looked older than her face. He crouched again to Ranger's level, so his words would pass through the same air she trusted. "They found something that shouldn't be there," he said gently. "You helped." The mother's hand tightened on her purse strap. "They told us nothing, only to see the desk." "That happens," Ethan said. He touched Ranger's shoulder. "Some things they keep quiet, so the world can keep moving." The girl reached to scratch the place under Ranger's jaw that made his eyes half close. "It wasn't me," she whispered, not looking away from the dog. He knew. Ethan glanced at his partner. Ranger's tail thumped once against the floor, a single beat you could miss if you weren't listening for it. "Maybe both of you did," Ethan said. When they stood to go, the crowd already looked different, lighter by a weight most of them didn't know they'd been carrying. The girl walked with her mother toward the line at the counter. She turned once and lifted her small hand in a wave that wasn't quite a wave. Ranger watched her until the blue raincoat folded into the cluster of bodies and was gone. Later, when the concourse had returned to its ordinary weather, families and delays and coffee cups tipped toward mouths, Ethan took Ranger to the quiet end of the terminal, where the windows made a long mirror of the runway. He rested his forearm along the shepherd's back and felt the slow rise and fall of breath. He could list the policies he'd bent, the questions he would have to answer, the report that would ask him to describe a truth that did not fit in a checkbox. But the image that stayed was simpler. The girl's small hands in Ranger's collar. The dog's stillness, not as stone, but as promise. Was it the girl? He asked himself, watching the rain. Was it Ranger? He thought of the way the human heart sometimes knows the weather, before the barometer does, of the way a good dog hears the storm in the first faint change of air. Maybe it was both. Maybe that was the only way any of them ever saved anyone. One fear made brave by another, one life leaning into another until the ground held. Ranger looked up at him, eyes steady, untroubled by questions people spend years trying to answer. Ethan scratched the rough fur at the base of his ear, and Ranger leaned into the touch with the quiet certainty of a partner who had done his job and would do it again when the sky darkened next. "Good work," Ethan said. The dog didn't wag. Not yet. He simply stood there beside the man, watching the rain lift off the glass, as if he could see through the weather to the thing that mattered most, the plane that never left the ground, and the people who would never know why. The news broke before Ethan even made it home. To routine maintenance inspection, no delays expected for other departures. The words sounded sterile, packaged for comfort, but Ethan had seen the engineers' faces when they pointed at the fracture buried deep in the wing joint. Nothing about it was routine. Inside the locker room, the TV above the vending machines glowed with another broadcast. A polished anchor in a blue suit smiled through the storm footage behind him. Officials say the decision was purely precautionary. Passengers were rebooked without incident. A few officers stood around watching, coffee in hand, nodding as if it was background noise. To them, it was just another glitch in the airport machine. Ethan didn't join the conversation. He unhooked Ranger's harness, hung it on its peg, and ran a hand down the shepherd's spine. The dog leaned into him for a moment, then padded to his mat in the corner. Normally, after a long shift, Ranger stretched out with a satisfied groan and sank into sleep like someone dropping into still water. Tonight was different. The dog lay down, yes, but his body stayed taut, ears twitching at every sound, paws shifting as if in dreams that had teeth. A restless sleep. Ethan sat on the bench across from him, elbows braced on his knees, and just watched. In his mind, he replayed the scene in slow motion. The little girl in the blue raincoat, arms locked around Ranger's neck. The way her voice broke when she whispered, "Please, don't let this flight take off." That wasn't ordinary fear. He'd seen ordinary fear thousands of times, at car crashes, in witness statements, in the eyes of rookies on their first call. This was different. Her terror had weight, direction. It pointed at something no one else could see. He rubbed a hand over his face, trying to shake the image, but it clung like wet clothes. His phone buzzed on the bench. A message from Sergeant Willis. "Good call today. Paperwork tomorrow. Get some rest." Good call. As if he'd just played a hunch on a poker hand. Ethan stared at the screen until it dimmed. It wasn't a hunch. It was Ranger. And maybe, though he hated to say it out loud, it was the girl. He leaned back against the lockers, listening to the building settle for the night. Somewhere in the ducts, warm air sighed. The faint hum of the soda machine filled the silence. Outside, the storm still dragged itself across Atlanta, rain hissing on the roof. The world had gone back to normal, but inside him, the wires were still hot. Ranger shifted, giving a low growl in his sleep. His paws twitched, chest rising sharp and shallow. Ethan crouched beside him, resting a hand on the thick fur between his shoulders. "Easy, boy, it's over." But even as he said it, he didn't believe it, because things like that didn't just happen once. Driving home, Ethan kept the radio low, catching pieces of coverage that repeated the same line. No threat to public safety. Mechanical irregularity discovered and resolved. He almost laughed. Irregularity. As if a hairline fracture that could shear a wing at 30,000 feet was no more serious than a light bulb burned out. But maybe that's what people needed. The soft version. If passengers knew how close they'd come, nobody would step on a plane again. He parked outside his small two-story in College Park, the storm still slicking the streets to mirrors. Ranger hopped out of the cruiser, shaking himself hard enough to scatter droplets across the driveway. Ethan clipped off his leash and let him bound toward the porch, his nails clicking against the wet wood. Inside, the house was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that carried memories. A picture frame face down on the shelf where his ex-wife's photo had once stood. a stack of unopened mail, the faint smell of oil and leather from the Harley project he never finished in the garage. Ranger circled once on his blanket near the couch, then flopped down, letting out a sound that was almost a sigh. Ethan dropped onto the couch with a groan, tugging off his boots, and just sat there in the half-light of the living room. The girl's eyes came back to him again, wide, glassy, filled with the kind of knowing a child shouldn't have. He closed his own, but her voice threaded through the silence. Promise me. Promise her what? That he could hold back the sky? That he could stop metal from breaking? Stop people from boarding planes they trusted too much? He was a cop, not a prophet. He worked with a dog, not a crystal ball. And yet, his gaze drifted to Ranger, who lay with one eye cracked open, as if sleep and duty were the same thing. You knew, Ethan said softly. The shepherd's tail brushed the floor once, a silent answer. Ethan leaned back, staring at the ceiling, the storm's rhythm faint against the windows. He thought about the paperwork he'd have to file tomorrow, the dry lines that would reduce everything to boxes ticked and words like behavioral anomaly. He thought about the passengers who would never know how close they'd come. He thought about the girl whose name he still didn't know, and how she had held his partner like a lifeline. Restless, he stood and poured himself a glass of water, staring out at the rain. Somewhere over the city, another plane lifted into the clouds, red lights blinking. He tracked it until it vanished into the dark. A small, heavy thought pressed into him then, one he couldn't shake. This isn't finished. And Ranger, stirring in his uneasy sleep, seemed to agree. 3 days later, the storm had left the city, but it hadn't left Ethan. The skies above Atlanta were a flat, indifferent blue, planes cutting white scars across them as if nothing fragile had ever lived in metal. Inside the terminal, the hum of life had returned, families clutching paper cups of coffee, businessmen tethered to their phones, children dragging wheeled suitcases like toys. The public had forgotten the cancelled flight. Airports were good at burying fear under schedules, but Ethan carried it still, tucked beneath his ribs like an old wound. Ranger padded at his side, tail low, body moving with that casual grace that always disguised a readiness to spring. To most travelers, the German Shepherd was a handsome mascot, a four-legged reassurance in a vest that read, Police K9. But Ethan knew better. Beneath the calm, Ranger was a wire stretched tight. He could hear trouble before anyone named it. They were halfway through a boarding check near gate B14 when Ethan saw her. The girl in the blue raincoat, though today it was unzipped, hanging loose over a faded t-shirt with a unicorn stamped across the front. Her mother walked a step behind, shoulders bent with the weary patience of someone who had fought too many small battles just to get here. For a moment, Ethan thought they hadn't noticed him. Then the girl's eyes found Ranger, and the look on her face stopped him cold. Recognition. Relief. Fear. It was like watching a flame spark in the open. Ranger felt it too. His ears pricked, then swiveled toward the gate where passengers queued in neat lines, offering IDs and boarding passes. He slowed his pace, nose testing the current of air, tail stiffening. The low rumble started in his chest, the kind Ethan had learned never to ignore. Easy, Ethan murmured, but his hand tightened on the leash. The girl froze in the middle of the concourse. She glanced at Ranger, then at the boarding passengers, her breath quickening as if she were running a race no one else could see. And then, with a suddenness that made her mother gasp, she hurried forward, straight toward them. "Hey," Ethan said, crouching instinctively as she reached them. "You remember Ranger?" She didn't answer. Her small hands gripped the dog's harness, knuckles white, and she leaned close as if sharing a secret she couldn't risk the world overhearing. Her whisper carried only to Ethan and the shepherd. "It's him. Don't let him board." The words dropped into Ethan like stones into deep water. He followed her gaze toward the gate. A man stood halfway through the line. Mid-40s, maybe. Jacket zipped to the chin, despite the warm terminal. He shifted his backpack from one shoulder to the other, eyes scanning the room, but never resting. To anyone else, he was just another traveler annoyed by delays. But Ranger had locked on him, nose twitching, body tense. "Sweetheart," the mother hissed, catching up. Her face flushed with apology. "Officer, I'm so sorry. Ethan lifted a hand. "It's all right." His voice was calm, but inside, the wires had gone hot again. The girl pressed her cheek against Ranger's side. "Please," she whispered. "He can't get on that plane." For a moment, Ethan heard only the sounds of the concourse. The roll of suitcase wheels, the distant call for pre-boarding at another gate, the soft bark of a service dog somewhere across the terminal. All ordinary, all forgettable. But against it was Ranger's growl, low and certain, vibrating through Ethan's hand. He'd been a cop long enough to know when instinct and evidence didn't match. But he'd also been a K9 handler long enough to know which one he trusted more. "All right," Ethan said quietly. He straightened, thumb brushing the mic at his shoulder. "Unit K9 requesting secondary screening at Gate B14. Possible alert on passenger bag." The man in line turned his head at the words. Just a flicker. But Ethan saw the shift in his jaw, the way his shoulders stiffened before he smoothed them again. TSA agents moved quickly, stepping in to redirect passengers with the ease of practice choreography. "Sir, step over here, please," one of them said. The man forced a thin smile. "Something wrong?" "Just a quick check," Ethan replied, his tone neutral, eyes steady. Ranger's growl deepened as the bag was lowered to the inspection table. His nose darted, tracing the seams, the zippers. Then he froze, posture rigid, head angled toward the side pocket. Ethan's pulse spiked. That was no false alarm. The agent unzipped the pocket slowly. Inside was a thick package bound in duct tape. Another agent peeled back a corner, and the glint of wires and a small circuit board stared back. The room shifted in an instant. Passengers murmured, recoiled. The gate agent's smile shattered. A mother pulled her toddler close, shielding his eyes as if from a sudden storm. "Clear the area," Ethan ordered. His voice cut through the confusion like a blade. TSA agents ushered people back, security closing around the suspect. The man stammered, "It's not real. It's nothing." But his words fell useless against the sight of wires and tape. His protests were drowned in the rush of boots, radios crackling, the crowd's frightened whispers. Ethan kept one hand firm on Ranger's harness, the other hovering near his sidearm, though he never drew it. The shepherd's body remained taut, a living barricade between danger and the innocent. The girl stood behind her mother now, eyes wide but unflinching. She didn't look surprised, only sad, as if this was the moment she'd already lived in her mind. Within minutes, the package was declared a hoax device, no explosives, just the skeleton of one, but it was enough to cause chaos, enough to make headlines if anyone wanted them, enough to make Ethan wonder. He watched as officers cuffed the man and led him away. Ranger's tail lowered, the growl fading, but the focus still sharp. Ethan exhaled slowly. He turned to the girl and her mother, crouching once more so his voice met them quietly. "You were right." The girl shook her head. She reached for Ranger's fur again, pressing her fingers into the thick coat. "No," she whispered. He was. Ranger leaned into her touch, his amber eyes steady. as if he too understood the truth in her words. Ethan stood and glanced at the suspect being dragged from the gate. Not a coincidence. Not luck. Something deeper. Something he couldn't yet name. And for the first time in years, a chill spread through him that had nothing to do with weather. The terminal was a living thing. It breathed in murmurs, in the shuffle of feet against polished tile, in the sharp rhythm of rolling suitcase wheels. When the duct-taped package came out of the suspect's backpack, that breathing changed. The air itself seemed to contract, shrinking down to the size of that inspection table. A TSA agent froze, one gloved hand hovering over the open zipper. Another leaned close, peeled back a corner of tape. The edge of a circuit board winked under the fluorescent lights. Coiled wires lay packed against one another, silent snakes waiting to be named. For a moment, no one moved. The concourse held its breath. Then panic found its voice. A woman clutched her child against her chest and stumbled backward, knocking into a businessman who spilled his coffee across the tile. People in line broke ranks, shoving toward the side, eyes wide with the primal understanding that this could kill me. A gate agent fumbled the PA microphone, her voice cracking as she tried to urge calm over a crowd that was already past listening. "Clear the area," Ethan barked, his voice cutting like a blade through the rising chaos. "Move back, now!" He pressed his palm into Ranger's harness, steadying the shepherd's tense frame. Ranger's body was coiled, a growl vibrating through his chest. Not the playful rumble of greeting, but the sound that came from instinct older than uniforms or laws. His amber eyes never left the bag. The suspect stammered as two officers forced him against the wall. "It's not real, it's just a prop." His voice pitched high with desperation. "It's nothing, I swear." But the device looked real enough to trick the eye, to spike adrenaline, to make passengers scatter like pigeons chased from a square. Ethan's pulse hammered, but his voice stayed even. "Bomb squad en route?" he asked into his radio. "ETA 5, came the crackling reply. 5 minutes in a terminal could be eternity. The TSA agents held their ground, faces tight, hands steady, though their eyes betrayed what their bodies refused to show. Fear. The package sat like a heart removed from a chest, still ticking in the mind, even if not in reality. Ethan scanned the crowd, watching the ripples of panic. A teenager filming on his phone, the screen shaking with nervous hands. A mother herding 2 toddlers toward the restrooms. An old man muttering prayers in Spanish as he shuffled away. The airport was good at disguising humanity as routine, but in moments like this, all the masks fell. He knelt beside Ranger, keeping his hand anchored on the dog's back. "Easy, partner," he whispered. "We've got this." The shepherd didn't blink. His body remained taut, like an arrow drawn and waiting for release. Minutes stretched thin. The bomb squad finally arrived. Heavy suits, calm movements, voices like anchors dropped in storm water. They cleared the immediate circle, worked with slow precision, unwrapping tape, peeling away the skin of fear. What they found was worse in its own way. No explosives, no detonator, no chemicals, just the hollow bones of a weapon. Wires and boards shaped into something that looked deadly, but lacked the heart to kill. A mock-up meant to deceive. The announcement rippled out in low voices. Fake. Passengers sagged in relief, some laughing nervously, others cursing under their breath. The mother who had cried clutched her child tighter, pressing kisses into his damp hair. The businessman swore at his coffee stain like the universe had offended him personally. But Ethan didn't feel relief. Relief was for accidents, for misunderstandings. This wasn't that. Someone had carried a bag into a boarding line containing a device crafted to mimic death. Someone had wanted this reaction, had wanted fear to bloom like wildfire across the terminal. And twice now, in less than a week, the girl had been there. He turned to find her in the thinning crowd. She stood half hidden behind her mother's leg, one hand curled into Ranger's fur. Her face was pale, eyes steady, fixed not on the device, but on the man being dragged away in handcuffs. She didn't flinch. She didn't look surprised. She only looked certain. Ethan crouched, lowering himself to her eye level, careful not to spook the mother who watched with wary suspicion. "You knew," he said quietly. The girl's lips parted, but she shook her head. Her voice was a whisper, only Ranger seemed meant to hear. "He did." Her small hand patted the shepherd's side. Ranger's tail brushed the floor once, slow and deliberate. Ethan swallowed hard. He wanted to tell himself this was chance, that a dog's nose and a child's fear just happened to align. But his gut told him the truth he didn't want to write in a report. This isn't coincidence. He stood, eyes drifting back to the device now sealed in a bomb squad case. A fake bomb today. A fractured wing days before. What next? What pattern was being drawn that only a dog and a child could trace? His radio crackled. "Unit K9, good work. Stand by for statement." Good work. The phrase felt thin, too small for the weight pressing into his chest. As the concourse slowly returned to order, passengers rerouted, announcements resuming their cheerful cadence. Ethan remained still, one hand resting on Ranger's head. His partner's fur was damp with sweat and fear not his own, the silent evidence of a dog who had once again carried weight no one else could see. The girl's eyes met his one last time before her mother tugged her toward the exit. There was no triumph there, only that same haunting certainty, as if she already knew this was just the beginning. Ethan watched them disappear into the crowd. Then he looked at Ranger. "You're right," he murmured. "This isn't over." The shepherd lifted his head, ears sharp, gaze unblinking, as if to say he knew that already. The baggage claim smelled of rubber belts and tired perfume. Travelers crowded around the carousel, waiting for luggage that always seemed to arrive slower than it should. Voices rose and fell in irritation, the occasional bark of laughter breaking through. To most, it was the last weary step of travel. To Ethan, it was just another corner of the airport that never truly slept. Ranger padded at his side, nails clicking against the tile as his nose swept the air. The shepherd moved with casual precision, but Ethan knew better than to call it casual. Ranger was always working. Every scent, every shift of posture in a stranger, every change in the rhythm of a crowd, he catalogued it all. Ethan trusted that more than the polished reports that passed through his desk. He'd just finished a sweep of the conveyor area when he heard it, a soft voice behind him. "Officer." He turned. There she was again, the girl in the blue raincoat, though today the hood was down, showing dark hair tangled at the shoulders. She stood only a few feet away, her mother trailing uncertainly behind her. The woman's expression was apologetic, but it was the girl's eyes that rooted Ethan in place. Wide, solemn, older than they had any right to be. Ranger noticed her first. His ears lifted, tail giving one measured sweep against the floor, before he moved closer on his own, as if greeting an old friend. The girl crouched without hesitation, fingers sinking into the thick fur at Ranger's neck. Relief spread across her small face, like warmth returning to frozen skin. She didn't smile. She only exhaled. "I had another dream," she whispered, words so faint Ethan almost missed them under the grind of the carousel. Ethan crouched to her level, the brim of his cap shadowing his eyes. "A dream?" Her head bobbed once, quick, nervous. She leaned closer, her gaze darting around as if afraid someone might overhear. "I saw a bag, under a big clock. People were running, some were crying." Then it stopped. She swallowed, pressing her cheek briefly against Ranger's fur. But it didn't feel like it stopped, because it went away. It felt like it stopped because someone stopped it. Behind her, the mother shifted uncomfortably, arms crossed, eyes flicking between them. "Officer, I keep telling her these things are just bad dreams. She reads things, sees too much on the news, and then—" But Ethan wasn't listening to the mother. He was looking at Ranger. The shepherd hadn't moved away. Instead, he sat squarely beside the girl, posture alert but calm, as if accepting her words as truth. His amber eyes lifted briefly to Ethan, steady, waiting. Ethan's stomach tightened. He wanted to dismiss it, wanted to file it away under coincidence or imagination. But he couldn't shake the memory of the fractured wing at Gate D20, the device that had rattled nerves days later. And he couldn't ignore Ranger's stillness now, the way he responded to her presence, as if he'd found the missing piece of a scent trail. "Under a clock, huh?" Ethan said carefully. The girl nodded again. Her hands never left Ranger's fur, gripping him as though he might vanish if she let go. It was black. A duffel bag, just sitting there like someone forgot it. But they didn't forget. They left it. The mother groaned softly. "Honey, please." Ethan raised a hand, surprising himself. Let her finish. Silence stretched between them. The girl's eyes shimmered in the fluorescent light, and for a moment Ethan saw something else there. Not just fear, but the burden of knowing. The kind of weight no child should carry. And then, unbidden, a memory stirred in him. His own daughter, Hannah, at that age, 8, with freckles scattered across her nose and a stubborn tilt to her chin. He remembered the mornings she'd sit at the kitchen table, hair still mussed from sleep, sketching horses in the margins of her schoolwork while he buttoned his uniform. She used to tell him her dreams too, about wild places and giant waves, and sometimes monsters. He'd smile, pat her shoulder, tell her they were just dreams. That was before the divorce, before Hannah grew quiet, distant, before she stopped calling him Dad and started calling him Ethan. He hadn't seen her in almost a year now, and every time he thought of reaching out, guilt clawed him back into silence. Looking at this girl, someone else's daughter, the ache sharpened. She shouldn't be here, whispering warnings that no one wanted to believe. She should be drawing unicorns on notebook paper, laughing too loud, learning to ride a bike without training wheels. Not this. Never this. Ethan's jaw tightened. He crouched lower, resting one steadying hand on Ranger's shoulder. "Where's this clock?" The girl shook her head. "I don't know. Just big. Round. It was high and everyone could see it." The mother touched her daughter's arm, voice gentle but strained. "Sweetheart, enough. You're scaring him." But Ethan wasn't scared. He was unsettled, yes. A weight pressed against the back of his mind, whispering that the pattern wasn't random, that these encounters were building towards something larger. Ranger's nose brushed the girl's hand, a quiet gesture of reassurance. The shepherd's tail tapped once against the floor. The girl looked up at Ethan again, eyes wide. "You believe me, don't you?" He hesitated. The cop in him wanted to say no, to protect procedure, to shield her from the consequence of false alarms. But the father in him, The man who still carried a daughter's absence like a stone in his chest couldn't dismiss her. "I believe in listening," he said finally. "And right now, I'm listening." The girl nodded, small shoulders relaxing just slightly. For the first time, Ethan thought he saw the hint of a smile ghost her lips. Her mother sighed, clearly unconvinced, but she didn't pull her away. Ethan straightened, the moment pressing into him like a vow. He would check. Not because protocol demanded it, but because instinct and something older than instinct told him he had to. Because sometimes a dream wasn't just a dream. And sometimes, when a child and a dog both pointed in the same direction, you didn't wait for proof. You moved. The central clock tower was one of those fixtures every traveler noticed but rarely thought about. 20 feet high, suspended above the open atrium of Atlanta International's busiest concourse, its glowing face marked the passage of time for tens of thousands each day. People arranged to meet under the clock. Lovers embraced there after months apart. Business partners shook hands beneath its steady hands. It was a landmark of comfort, familiar, ordinary. But that night, it felt different. Ethan knew it the moment Ranger stiffened. They had been sweeping near the escalators, crowds pushing past with the usual rush of connecting flights, when the shepherd slowed. His ears tilted forward, his gait shortened, and then he froze, his entire frame locked into that unmistakable alert posture. "What is it, boy?" Ethan asked quietly, though he already knew. Ranger's nose swung toward the base of the clock tower, where a black duffel bag sat propped against the steel support beam. No tags, no owner nearby. Just there, silent as a held breath. Ethan's pulse jumped. His mind replayed the girl's words from only a day earlier. "I saw a bag under a big clock. This wasn't a coincidence anymore." He pressed his mic. "Unit K9 to command. I've got an unattended duffel under the central clock. Possible hazard. Request immediate secondary response." Static crackled. Then the reply. "Copy, K9. Stand by. TSA units en route." Ethan kept his eyes sweeping the crowd, voice steady but edged with steel. "Everyone back. Move away from the tower. Now." Confusion rolled through the travelers first, mutters, annoyed glances. But then they saw Ranger. The shepherd's rigid posture, ears forward, tail locked. That body language carried across any language barrier. People began to retreat, some hurriedly, some glancing over shoulders with dawning fear. "Sir, please step back," Ethan called as a man reached for the bag. The stranger froze, eyes widening, and then followed the others as TSA agents rushed in to secure a perimeter. The concourse transformed in seconds. Where there had been noise and bustle, there was now a widening circle of emptiness, fear thickening the air like humidity before a storm. Ranger growled, low and steady, eyes fixed on the duffel. Ethan knelt beside him, one hand resting firm on his harness. "It's okay, partner. We've got this." The bomb squad arrived fast, faster than Ethan expected, which told him command had been anticipating something like this since the last incident. Men in heavy gear, visors down, voices clipped and controlled. They moved past the cordon, equipment cases in hand. The crowd pressed against the tape, phones raised, faces pale with the horror of almost. Ethan's gaze drifted to the far side of the perimeter, and there she was, the girl, standing beside her mother, small fingers gripping the woman's coat sleeve, her eyes locked on the bag. She didn't speak, didn't wave. She only watched, and she didn't look surprised. Ethan felt the hair rise on his arms. One of the bomb techs crouched near the duffel, scanner wand sweeping over its surface. He glanced back at his partner, then carefully unzipped the side. Ethan's throat tightened. Ranger leaned forward against the harness, a low warning building in his chest. Then the tech pulled the flap open, Inside was no mock-up inside this time, no empty threat. The mass of wires and dense blocks of explosive compound sat packed and waiting, ugly in its silence. The kind of device built not to scare, but to kill. Ethan heard someone in the crowd gasp. Another muttered a prayer. "Confirmed," the tech said flatly into his mic. "This is live." The words dropped into the concourse like stones through water. Ethan felt the ripple move through him, through the TSA agents, through the passengers straining to hear. Ranger barked once, sharp, urgent, then fell silent, his gaze burning holes in the bag as if sheer will could hold it from detonation. "Clear the area," Ethan ordered again, louder now. "Everyone back another 50 feet. TSA agents moved quickly, shepherding families, calming the panicked. Children began to cry, their small voices carrying like alarms through the cavernous space. The bomb squad worked with gloved precision, hands moving carefully over the device. Ethan could see sweat beading at the edge of one man's visor, the tremor of tension in shoulders, trying not to shake. Each wire, each connection, was a question answered wrong by death. Minutes stretched into a lifetime. Ethan kept one eye on Ranger, one on the girl. Ranger remained coiled, silent, but unyielding. The girl pressed her face against her mother's side, but never looked away. Finally, after what felt like hours, the lead tech raised his hand. Device secure, disarmed. The collective exhale from the crowd was almost physical, like a wave of air rolling back through the terminal. Some clapped. Some cried. Some simply stood there, stunned by the knowledge of how close they had come. Ethan let out a long breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. His hand slid down Ranger's back, and only then did the shepherd ease, muscles unwinding, tail lowering with deliberate slowness. "You did good, boy," Ethan whispered. The girl across the way lifted her head then, her eyes finding him. She mouthed two words he could read even through the distance. "I told you." And Ethan couldn't deny it. This wasn't luck. This wasn't a chance. The fracture at gate D20, the fake bomb in the backpack. And now this, a real device capable of tearing the heart out of the airport. All of it tied together, stitched by threads, only a frightened child and a German shepherd seemed able to see. Ethan's chest tightened with the thought. He wasn't just dealing with random threats. He was in the middle of something larger, something planned. He gave Ranger's leash a light tug. "Come on, partner." But his gaze lingered on the girl, and for the first time since Hannah drifted from his life, Ethan felt the unfamiliar weight of protectiveness settle deep in his bones. Not duty, not protocol, something older, something closer to fatherhood. The clock above them ticked on, its hands moving steady, indifferent. But for everyone standing there, time had split into before the bag and after the bag. And Ethan knew this was only the beginning. The concourse still smelled faintly of burned circuitry. Even though the bomb squad had cleared the area and passengers had been rerouted, Ethan swore he could feel the echo of that duffel bag sitting beneath the clock tower. The clock's ticking was steady again, the atrium filled with the low hum of travelers resuming their routines. But to Ethan, the silence underneath it all was louder. He stood at the edge of the cordoned-off area with Ranger at his side, the shepherd sitting tall, ears flicking at every sound. The dog wasn't restless, not anymore, but his focus hadn't dimmed. Even with the threat dismantled, Ranger's eyes swept the room like a sentinel unwilling to lower his guard. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck, staring up at the face of the clock. She saw this. The girl, no more than 8 years old, had told him about a bag under a clock. And there it had been. Not a toy, not a mistake, not a false scare. but a real explosive. Enough to rip through steel, glass, and flesh. 3 times now. 3 times she'd spoken. 3 times she'd been right. He tightened his grip on Ranger's leash, the thought settling into him like ice. Cole. The voice belonged to Sergeant Tom Willis, a man Ethan had worked under for nearly a decade. Willis was broad-shouldered, lined with years of sun and fluorescent lights, his presence carrying the calm authority of someone who'd seen too much and survived it anyway. He came to stand beside Ethan, eyes tracking the cleared concourse. "Hell of a night," Willis muttered. "Yeah," Ethan said. His voice came out rougher than he intended. For a moment they just stood there, watching TSA agents finish their sweep, travelers peeking nervously from beyond the tape. The clock face glowed above them, indifferent as ever. Then Ethan exhaled hard, words leaving before he could catch them. "She's been right 3 times, Sarge. What if she's part of this?" Willis turned his head sharply. "The kid?" Ethan nodded. "The girl in the blue raincoat. First at D20 with the wing fracture, then the backpack. Now this." He gestured at the cleared space where the duffel had sat. "She told me. Bag under a clock, and here it was." Willis studied him for a long beat, his eyes narrowing in thought. "And you're wondering if she's connected, if she knows too much." Ethan's jaw flexed. "I don't know what I'm wondering, but it doesn't feel like luck." The sergeant rubbed his chin, the scrape of stubble audible even under the din of the terminal. "You've been in this game long enough to know people see patterns where they want to. You've also been in it long enough to know coincidence doesn't always mean conspiracy." "She's a kid, Tom," Ethan said. His voice cracked on the word. "A scared little girl. But she's right. Every damn time." Willis sighed, folding his arms. "Look, I'm not saying ignore it. I'm not saying don't keep your eyes open. But you need to tread carefully here. She's a civilian. More than that, she's a child. If you start leaning too hard on her, if word gets out, you're basing security calls on something a girl said in passing." He shook his head. "Command will bury you. And her." Ethan's chest tightened. He knew Willis was right, but knowing didn't make it easier. "I can't shake it," Ethan admitted quietly. "The way she looks at Ranger, the way he reacts to her. It's like they're speaking the same language, and I'm the one standing outside trying to translate." At the mention of his name, Ranger shifted, glancing up at Ethan with steady amber eyes. He didn't move otherwise, just watched, calm and patient, waiting for his handler's next cue. Willis followed the look, his expression softening slightly. "That dog's never steered you wrong." "No," Ethan said, his hand drifting to scratch the shepherd's ear. "And he hasn't steered me wrong about her either." Silence stretched between them. The sound of the crowd had faded to background noise, the airport settling into the uneasy rhythm it always found after a scare. Finally, Willis clapped a heavy hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Listen, do your job. Trust your partner. But don't let your heart get tangled up in this girl. You've got history. I know that. Don't make her into someone she's not." Ethan stiffened, the unspoken reference to Hannah landing like a blow. His daughter, estranged, absent, a ghost that lived in every quiet corner of his house. Willis didn't push. He never did. He just gave the warning, then started to walk away, leaving Ethan with the echo of his own doubts. Ethan crouched beside Ranger, the leash slack between them. He searched the shepherd's face for something. Reassurance, clarity, maybe absolution. Ranger tilted his head, leaned gently into Ethan's palm as it rested against his cheek. Silent loyalty. No questions, no judgment, just presence. Ethan's throat tightened. You'd never let me walk blind, would you, partner? Ranger's tail tapped once against the floor. Ethan drew in a breath, the storm of his thoughts quieting just slightly under the dog's steady gaze. Maybe Willis was right. Maybe he was too close, too ready to see meaning in places it didn't belong. But he knew this much. Ranger believed in the girl, and that was enough for now. Standing again, Ethan looked one last time at the face of the clock. The hands marched on, indifferent to the lives nearly undone beneath them. He tightened his grip on Ranger's leash. "Come on," he murmured. "We're not done." And with the shepherd pacing steady at his side, he walked back into the airport's endless tide, carrying a fear he couldn't name and a faith he couldn't explain. The house creaked with the kind of silence only widowers knew. It wasn't empty, not in the way abandoned buildings were empty. It had furniture, pictures, a hum from the refrigerator, the smell of coffee grounds left too long in the trash. But the air was hollow, stretched thin, like it had once been full of laughter, and now carried only echoes. Ethan sat in the living room, a half-drained glass of bourbon on the table beside him. The TV glowed with the late-night news, anchors speaking in polished tones about delays and weather, about a minor security scare at the airport. Their voices were even, calm, meant to soothe. But to Ethan they rang false, like someone whistling in the dark. He rubbed his eyes, exhaustion gnawing at the edges of him, but refusing to pull him under. Every time he closed his lids, he saw the girl, eyes wide, whispering about the bag under the clock. He saw the duffel torn open to reveal wires and explosives. He saw what almost was. She's been right 3 times. What if she's part of this? He had thrown those words at his sergeant earlier, but they hadn't left him. They churned in him now, circling like sharks. Was she a victim of circumstance? A child with some uncanny instinct? Or worse, a piece of the design itself, manipulated by someone who wanted her exactly where she was? Ranger shifted from his blanket on the floor. The shepherd stretched once, his claws ticking against the hardwood, and padded over. Without a sound, he rested his head in Ethan's lap. The weight of it startled him, heavy, warm, grounding. Ethan looked down and met amber eyes that seemed to know more than any human had a right to. "You feel it too, huh?" Ethan's voice was rough, quiet. Ranger huffed through his nose, not moving otherwise. The steady pressure of his head on Ethan's thigh was enough. It always was. Ethan stroked the dog's fur slowly, letting his hand trace the familiar rise and fall of muscle and bone beneath the coat. With every pass, the storm inside him softened just a little. But restlessness clung. He glanced toward the hallway where framed pictures still hung, a gallery of lives gone sideways. His late wife, Claire, smiling in a sunlit park, her arm hooked through his. Their daughter, Hannah, age 6, cheeks flushed from running, holding a kite string in one hand and his fingers in the other. He hadn't had the heart to take those frames down, but they no longer belonged to this house. They belonged to another lifetime. The bourbon burned his throat when he swallowed it. He set the glass down harder than he meant to, and Ranger's ears flicked at the sound. Hannah. That name alone could keep him awake at night. 17 now, though in his memory she stayed frozen at 12, the age she stopped looking at him like he was a hero. The divorce had carved distance between them, then hardened it into silence. She lived with Claire's parents now, across the state, and the phone calls came less and less. The last time he'd seen her, she hadn't called him Dad. Just Ethan. Cold. Formal. A stranger's name from the mouth that once called for him when thunderstorms rolled through her window. He closed his eyes against the sting. Maybe that's why the girl at the airport got under his skin. She wasn't Hannah, not by blood, not by anything. But when she clung to Ranger like the shepherd was her only anchor, when she whispered warnings no one wanted to believe, Ethan felt something stir. Protective. Paternal. A fragment of what he'd lost. And it terrified him. Because Willis was right. He couldn't afford to let his heart twist this into something it wasn't. But the heart didn't take orders the way the procedure did. Ranger shifted again, pressing his muzzle deeper against Ethan's leg. The dog's breathing was slow, steady. The rhythm of a creature who lived only in the present. Not in regrets. Not in fear of the future. Just here. Now. Ethan envied him for that. "You're the only one I can count on," Ethan said softly. His hand paused on Ranger's head, fingers curling against the thick fur. "The only one who doesn't leave." The words surprised him when they came out. Bitter, raw. He hadn't meant to say them. But Ranger didn't flinch. His tail gave a single quiet thump against the floor, as if to say he understood. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the streets wet and shining. Street lamps cast pale halos across the pavement. Somewhere in the distance, a freight train moaned through the night, its horn long and mournful. Ethan leaned back into the couch, staring at the ceiling. Sleep still wouldn't come. The girl's words tangled with his daughter's absence, with his wife's empty side of the bed, with the relentless ticking of that damn clock tower. Was the girl a warning, a blessing, or a curse? He didn't know. All he knew was that the airport wasn't finished with him yet. And neither was she. Ranger's steady breath against his lap anchored him in the present. The shepherd's silent loyalty was a balm against the ache of memory, a reminder that whatever else failed, whatever else left, he wasn't alone. Not completely. Ethan let his hand rest there, heavy with fatigue. "Stay with me, boy," he whispered. Ranger's tail tapped again, and for the first time that night, Ethan allowed his eyes to close, though rest still kept its distance. The radio crackled just as Ethan was finishing a sweep near the baggage drop. "Unit 12, respond Concourse C. Report of unaccompanied juvenile in restricted zone. Repeat, juvenile past secured access, refusing to leave." Ethan froze, his hand tightening on Ranger's leash. A ripple of unease ran through him. He didn't need the dispatcher to say more. Somehow, he already knew. "Copy," he said into the mic, voice low. "Unit 12 en route." Ranger caught the change in tone. His ears flicked forward, body rising into a taut line of focus. He didn't pull on the leash, didn't whine. He simply waited, ready. The walk to Concourse C felt longer than it was. The terminal bustled as usual, announcements echoing overhead, passengers dragging bags, a child crying because his balloon had slipped away. All ordinary. Yet Ethan felt the hum of tension beneath it, the kind of hum he'd learned to trust. When they reached the security officers waiting outside a service door, Ethan saw the relief on their faces. "She's in there," one of them said, jerking his thumb at the door. "Wouldn't give her name. Kept saying she needed to find you." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Of course she did." The officer frowned. "You know her?" Ethan didn't answer. He pushed the door open. The service corridor smelled faintly of cleaning chemicals and metal, a place meant for staff, not children. And yet there she was, the girl, sitting against the wall, knees pulled to her chest, her backpack beside her, like a traveling companion. Her blue raincoat looked too big in the sterile light. When she saw Ranger, she stood. Relief swept across her small face. "You came." Ethan stepped closer, lowering his voice so the officers outside couldn't hear. "You can't be back here. Do you understand that? You could get in serious trouble." Her eyes didn't flinch, She lifted her chin, voice steady despite the tremor at its edges. I had to. There's a man. He's wearing a heavy brown coat. He's going through the wrong gate. Ethan blinked. What? She nodded quickly, hands twisting the straps of her backpack. I saw him, not just in my head. I saw him here. He's going through a gate he doesn't belong to. He shouldn't be there. Ranger moved closer, brushing her hand with his nose. The girl immediately rested her fingers in his fur, as though he anchored her to the ground. Ethan's heart thudded harder. She'd been right before, 3 times. The fractured wing, the fake bomb, the duffel under the clock, and now this. He crouched so his eyes met hers. Listen to me. Did you actually see him, or did you dream it? She hesitated, then whispered, both. The word chilled him. From the doorway, one of the officers called, Everything good in there? Ethan straightened, forcing his voice into a neutral register. Yeah, just talking to her. Stand by. He turned back to the girl, his tone dropping again. Where? Her eyes darted toward the concourse beyond the wall, as if she could see through it. Key 14, the door. He's going to try to board, but he doesn't belong on that plane. Ethan exchanged a glance with Ranger. The shepherd's body was rigid, eyes sharp, as if the girl's words had become scent itself. Ethan's stomach knotted. This wasn't protocol. He couldn't justify a full security halt based on a child's whisper. But then again, how many lives had been spared already because he'd listened? He reached for his mic, thumb hovering over the button. If he was wrong, it would be paperwork, embarrassment, maybe a lecture from command. If he was right, it might be the only thing standing between order and disaster. He looked down at Ranger. The shepherd lifted his head, amber eyes locking onto his handlers. Silent, steady. Ethan exhaled. All right, he murmured. We'll check it out. To the girl, he added, You stay with me this time. No more running off into restricted areas. Deal? She nodded, clutching Ranger's fur, like she'd been waiting her whole life for that answer. Concourse C was alive with the usual churn of travelers, rolling bags, hurried voices, the metallic groan of the moving walkway. But Ethan felt it differently now. Every sound carried an edge. Every face looked sharper, suspicious. Ranger moved at his side, nose twitching, his pace steady but taut, like a hunter on a leash. The girl's words burned in his mind. A man in a heavy brown coat. He's going through the wrong gate. They rounded the corner, and there he was. Tall, shoulders hunched. A heavy coat zipped to the neck despite the mild air conditioning that kept the terminal cool. His stride was purposeful but guarded, eyes sliding left and right as though measuring who might be watching. He reached the crowd at gate C-14, blending in with passengers preparing to board. Ranger stopped dead. A growl rumbled deep in his chest, low and resonant. His hackles rose, tail stiff. Ethan's heart kicked into a higher gear. He'd seen Ranger lock on like that before. At drug busts, at felony takedowns. It was the shepherd's verdict. This one. Ethan squared his shoulders, voice cutting through the noise. Sir, Atlanta PD, may I see your boarding pass? The man froze for the briefest fraction of a second. Then he turned, face slack with a strained smile. Of course, officer. No problem. He fished into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled slip of paper, handing it over with exaggerated calm. Ethan scanned it quickly. Gate C9, not C14. This isn't your gate, Ethan said evenly. Why are you here? The man's eyes flicked to the side, then back. His jaw tightened, got turned around. Happens. Ethan didn't move. Ranger's growl deepened, vibrating through the leash. The dog's eyes never left the man's torso. Ethan's instincts screamed. Something was wrong. Sir, I'm going to ask you to step aside with me. The man bolted. He shoved past 2 passengers and sprinted down the concourse, coat flaring as he ran. People yelped, stumbling aside. Luggage toppled. "Stop!" Ethan's voice thundered as he launched after him. "Police!" Ranger surged forward with explosive power, nearly pulling the leash from Ethan's hand. Ethan let go. He trusted the shepherd more than speed or procedure. Ranger tore across the tile, nails skittering, body a blur of black and tan. The man looked back just in time to see the K9 close the distance. Panic flashed in his eyes. He tried to cut toward the service corridor, but Ranger leapt, all muscle and momentum, colliding with him mid-stride. The impact slammed the man sideways into the wall. He crumpled under Ranger's weight, a cry torn from his throat. The shepherd's jaws clamped into the thick coat at the shoulder, dragging him down. The man writhed, kicking, but Ranger held fast, a low snarl vibrating through clenched teeth. Ethan was there an instant later, knees hitting the tile as he grabbed the man's wrist and wrenched it behind his back. The suspect cursed, thrashing, but Ethan's knee pinned him down. "Don't move," Ethan barked. His hands moved with muscle memory. One arm twisted into compliance, zip ties securing his wrists. And then the coat shifted. The fabric pulled open, revealing a rectangular package strapped tight against the man's torso. Wires. Duct tape. For a heartbeat, Ethan's stomach plunged. He yanked back instinctively, dragging Ranger with him. Passengers screamed, some scattering, others frozen in shock. But no detonation came. Bomb squad arrived within minutes, their heavy gear moving through the crowd like grim reapers. They cut away the device with surgical care, neutralizing the scene. The announcement came fast, inert. A mock-up. No explosives. Another fake. The concourse buzzed with fear and confusion. Travelers whispered in clusters, some crying, others recording with phones. TSA hustled people back, trying to stitch order into chaos. Ethan stood off to the side, chest heaving. Ranger pressed close to his leg. The shepherd's fur bristled, his amber eyes sharp and unyielding. He hadn't taken them off the suspect, even after the device was declared harmless. Willis arrived, face hard. "Another fake?" he asked the nearest tech. "Yeah," the man said grimly. "Looks real. Weighed to feel real, but dead inside." Willis cursed under his breath, then turned to Ethan. "That's 2 mock-ups in a week." "Someone's testing us." Ethan nodded slowly, his jaw tight. "Testing the system. Seeing how far they can push before we break." His gaze drifted to Ranger, who sat steady, chest rising and falling in rhythm, as if ready for the next call. Then, beyond the shepherd, Ethan caught sight of the girl and her mother in the crowd, watching with wide eyes. She didn't look surprised, only certain. And that certainty cut deeper than anything else. The cafe sat just beyond the airport perimeter, tucked between a rental car lot and a gas station that smelled faintly of diesel. It wasn't much. Chipped paint on the windowsills, neon signs buzzing above the door. The kind of place flight crews and ground workers slipped into between shifts. But it was quiet. And that was what Ethan needed. He spotted them at a corner booth. The mother, shoulders hunched inside a faded cardigan, stirred a mug of coffee she wasn't drinking. Her daughter sat beside her, nose buried in a paperback, Ranger's head pressed against her leg. The shepherd had already claimed her, his tail brushing lightly against her boots with each breath. When Ethan walked in, the mother looked up. Relief flickered across her face, tempered by hesitation. She gestured to the empty seat. "Officer Cole," she said softly. "Thank you for coming." "Ethan's fine," he replied, sliding into the booth. For a moment, silence stretched. The hum of the refrigerator filled the gap. The girl turned a page without reading it. Finally, the mother exhaled. "I suppose I owe you an explanation." Ethan didn't speak. He knew sometimes the best way to draw the truth was to wait. "She's always been like this," the woman whispered. "Since she was little. Nightmares. Visions, I guess you'd call them. At first I thought they were just bad dreams. But then, things started happening. She dreamed my father would fall. The next day he slipped and broke his hip. She dreamed of a car accident. Days later, the neighbor's boy ended up in the hospital. Too many times, Ethan. Too many." Ethan's eyes flicked toward the girl. She pretended to read, but her shoulders had tensed, every word pressing against her skin. "You never told anyone?" he asked. The mother shook her head. "How could I? People laugh. Or worse, they look at her like she's cursed. I wanted to protect her, so I told her to stay quiet, keep it between us. And now?" The woman's gaze lifted, weary eyes, hollowed by years of carrying too much. "Now she tells you, because you listened when no one else would." Ethan felt the weight of that settle over him like a stone. He glanced at Ranger, whose amber eyes were half closed as the girl's fingers absently rubbed his ear. Trust. So simple for a dog. So impossibly complicated for everyone else. The mother's voice broke. "Do you know what it's like to hold your child while she wakes up screaming, saying she saw people die, and not know whether to say it's just a dream or that it might be real?" Ethan swallowed hard. He thought of Hannah, those storms years ago when she'd crawl into his bed, clutching her bear, whispering about shadows. He used to tell her nothing could hurt her while he was there. But eventually, she stopped coming, stopped believing, stopped calling. "I know a little about wanting to protect your kid from the world," he said quietly. The woman nodded, tears catching her lashes. She saw that plane. She saw that man. And when she saw the bag under the clock, she begged me not to make her stay silent. How could I tell her no when she believed lives were at stake? Ethan looked at the girl again. Calm face, but her fingers gripped Ranger's fur, like every word was a weight she couldn't set down. "What she's carrying isn't her fault," Ethan said. "And it sure as hell isn't yours. But if she keeps being right, we need to pay attention." The mother sagged. "So what do we do?" "We watch. We listen. We won't dismiss her." The girl finally looked up from her book, her gaze steady, older than her years. "I don't want people to hate me for what I see," she whispered. The words pierced Ethan like a blade. He wanted to reach across the table, to tell her she wasn't alone. Instead, he nodded once. "They won't. Not while I'm here." The girl pressed her cheek against Ranger's head. The shepherd didn't move, just let her lean into him like a stone promise. Outside, planes roared overhead, their engines rattling the glass. Time kept moving. But inside that booth, Ethan felt the pattern closing in. 3 times she had been right, and something told him a 4th was coming. The cafe thinned out. The late rush gave way to the clink of spoons and a dusty radio humming in the corner. Ethan watched Ranger with the girl. He'd seen his partner endure children before. School tours, field trips, endless little hands tugging ears and tail. The Ranger tolerated it with patience, but this was different. He didn't just tolerate the girl, he chose her. When Ethan sat down, Ranger hadn't taken his usual post at his handler's side. He'd shifted to her, chin resting across her lap like it belonged there. Every so often, his tail tapped once. Deliberate reassurance. The girl responded in kind, weaving her fingers into his ruff as if anchoring herself. She didn't squeal or chatter like most children. She simply relaxed, shoulders uncoiling for the first time in days. Ethan swallowed the heat rising in his eyes. He'd seen Ranger bond before, throw himself between a suspect and an officer, press close when Ethan faltered. Loyalty was in his bones, but this wasn't loyalty. This was recognition. Ranger's amber eyes softened, gentled, as if he knew the girl carried something fragile worth guarding. "You're spoiling him," Ethan said. The girl's cheek stayed pressed to Ranger's head. "No," she whispered. "He spoils me." The words knocked the air from him. Her mother offered a tired smile. "She hasn't slept through a night in months, but with him, she looks like she could." Ethan couldn't reply. His throat was too tight. Ranger let out a long sigh that sounded suspiciously like contentment, paw sliding across the linoleum until it rested against her shoe. She giggled, a small, unguarded sound that cracked something inside Ethan. He hadn't heard Hannah laugh like that in years. Now he watched another child, another dog. Except this time, the whispers weren't about playground fears. They could mean life or death, and Ranger seemed to know it. "You believe me, don't you?" the girl breathed, not to Ethan, but to the dog. Ranger blinked once, slow and deliberate, and leaned harder into her lap. Her faint smile lifted. For the first time, she looked like a child instead of a harbinger. Ethan exhaled. His partner, the most finely trained dog he'd ever known, was siding with her, believing in her, and he couldn't ignore that. The mother stirred, glancing at the clock. "We should go. She needs rest, and I've probably said too much already." Ethan nodded, though every part of him resisted letting them leave. "I'll walk you out." As they slid from the booth, Ranger didn't wait for a command. He rose and moved to the girl's other side, body angled protectively between her and the door. Ethan stared. Ranger had never done that, not with strangers, not even with Hannah. It wasn't training. It was instinct. And that instinct said one thing: she matters. Outside, the air smelled of rain-soaked asphalt. The girl crouched to hug Ranger tight. "Goodbye," she whispered, then softer. "For now." Ranger pressed his head against her shoulder, still as a statue. Ethan's fists clenched in his jacket pockets. The mother guided her daughter into the car. He watched until the taillights vanished. Only then did he turn to Ranger. "You know something I don't you?" The shepherd pressed his flank against Ethan's leg, steady as a vow. Ethan realized Ranger hadn't just bonded with the girl. He'd recognized her. The parking lot was slick with rain, asphalt gleaming under the lamps. Travelers drifted back toward the airport. Ethan leaned against his cruiser, Ranger at his side. The girl lingered by her mother's car. Her raincoat clung to her small frame, backpack crooked. She shifted restlessly, then turned. Her gaze locked onto Ethan. "There will be two this time," she whispered. Her voice wasn't loud, but the night carried it across the lot. Ethan straightened. "Two?" She nodded, knuckling white on her straps. "Two men, 2 bags. I saw them." Her mother froze at the car door. "Sweetheart," she began, but the girl shook her head. "I know what I saw." Ethan's pulse thudded. 2 men, 2 bags, bigger, coordinated. He crouched, keeping his tone calm. "Tell me exactly." The girl's eyes darted to Ranger, as if seeking his permission. The shepherd tilted his head, an amber gaze steady. She exhaled shakily. "I dreamed about it last night, clearer than before. I was in the terminal. Snow outside, people running, screaming. 2 men, one with a black bag, one silver. Ranger found them both. Then I heard glass shatter, then fire." Her voice cracked. She pressed a hand to her mouth. Ranger leaned into her, anchoring her trembling shoulders. Ethan's gut clenched. She'd been right 3 times. This was no longer a coincidence. 2 men, 2 bags. It screamed escalation, organization, deliberate. "This isn't something we can ignore," he said. Her mother's voice trembled. "And when the wrong people hear she knows things she shouldn't." "What happens then?" Ethan didn't answer, but the truth pressed hard. Someone out there was testing the system, and now they were ready to strike harder. He rested a hand on Ranger's head. The dog didn't blink, only pressed closer to the girl. Ethan realized with a pang, Ranger wasn't protecting him anymore. He was protecting her. The girl opened her eyes again, calm now. "It's coming soon." Ethan's instincts screamed the same thing. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, to send her home to be a child again, but he couldn't. Rain began drumming against his cruiser. Ethan stood, jacket pulled tight. He looked at the girl's mother. "Whatever happens, you keep her close. You call me if she sees anything else, no matter what." The woman nodded, tears in her eyes. The girl hugged Ranger again. "You'll find them. I know you will." Ranger's tail swished once, silent as a promise. Ethan stood in the storm, watching them drive away. Taillights vanished into the dark. He clenched his fists, the weight of what was coming sinking deep into his bones. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. And for the first time in years, Ethan was afraid. The city didn't look like Atlanta anymore. Snow had swallowed it whole. Highways that usually glowed red with taillights were muffled under drifting white. The skyline, sharp and proud on normal days, was softened to ghostly outlines behind curtains of falling flakes. Even the airport, that restless hive of glass and steel, seemed subdued, its runways hidden, its terminals wrapped in the hush only snow can bring. From his kitchen window, Ethan watched it fall. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of quiet that carried no sound but its own heartbeat. His breath fogged the glass as he leaned close, a mug of coffee cooling in his hands. Ranger sat at his feet, tail curled neatly around his legs, his ears twitching now and then at the groan of distant plows. It should have been beautiful. But all Ethan felt was the crawl of unease tightening across his chest. The girl's words hadn't left him. There will be 2 this time. 2 men, 2 bags. He'd replayed them night after night, turning them over like stones in his palm, hoping to find a different weight in them. But the heaviness never changed. And now, with the storm pressing down on the city, the omen felt closer, like the snow itself was carrying it in. Ranger shifted, rising to pad toward the back door. He sat there, staring out at the blanket of white that covered the yard, then glanced back at Ethan. His amber eyes were steady, but they carried a question. "Are you ready?" Ethan sighed and set his mug down. "I don't know, boy," he admitted. "I don't think anyone's ever ready for this kind of thing." The shepherd didn't blink. He simply waited. Ethan pulled on his coat, clipped Ranger's leash, and stepped out into the storm. The world outside was a different place. Familiar streets transformed into pale rivers of silence. Snowflakes clung to his lashes, melted against his lips, bit cold through the seams of his gloves. Ranger moved beside him without hesitation, his dark coat stark against the white, his breath steaming in the air. The city's sounds were gone. No horns, no engines, no voices. Just the crunch of boots and paws breaking the crusted snow. It felt like walking through a dream, or perhaps through the pause between heartbeats, before something broke. As they moved, Ethan's thoughts circled back again. The girl hadn't guessed. She hadn't stumbled into lucky warnings. 3 times she had spoken, and 3 times disaster had been waiting. And now she had seen 2 men, 2 bags. He didn't know how to explain it, didn't know if he even should. To command, it would sound like nonsense. To most people, madness. But Ranger believed her, and Ranger's instincts had never once failed him. They walked until they reached the overlook near the airport perimeter, a stretch of chain-link fence that caught the snow like lace. Beyond it, the runways lay deserted, lights blinking faintly in the white haze. A single plow crawled along the tarmac, a lone insect in the storm. Ethan stopped, resting a hand on the fence. Ranger pressed against his leg, silent, watchful. The snow fell harder. It should have been a reprieve, weather bad enough to ground flights, to halt movement, to buy them time. But to Ethan, it felt like the opposite. The hush was too complete, the stillness too fragile. The storm wasn't a shield. It was the curtain before the stage. He thought of Hannah, of how she used to love snow, how she'd press her nose to the window as flakes began to fall, begging him to take her sledding, even if it was just an inch or two. He thought of Claire, laughing as she bundled their daughter in scarves, too big for her face. Those days felt like a lifetime ago. Now he stood alone in the cold, his only company the shepherd, who never left his side. The storm thickened, swallowing the horizon. The unease inside him spread, filling every corner of him until it was almost physical. He knew, the way cops sometimes just knew, that the girl's warning wasn't far off. Ranger lifted his head, ears swiveling toward the terminal in the distance. His tail stiffened, his breath quickened. Ethan followed his gaze, though all he saw was snow and shadow. But he didn't need to see it. He trusted that look. Something was coming. Ethan crouched, resting a gloved hand against Ranger's fur, feeling the steady thrum of the shepherd's life under his palm. Whatever it is, we'll face it together, he murmured. The snow whirled harder, the city muffled deeper, but Ethan's words cut through the hush like a vow. And in that frozen silence, he knew the storm wasn't the danger. It was the warning. The calm before chaos. Concourse A was quieter than usual, and the storm outside had thinned flights to a trickle, leaving half the chairs empty, their plastic backs slick with the damp of coats hung over them. Fluorescent lights hummed above, their sterile glow reflecting off the polished floor. The loudspeaker buzzed with routine announcements, each one echoing across the hollowed space, reminders of normalcy in a moment that was anything but. Ethan felt it the second he stepped through the checkpoint, the weight, the tightening of the air. Ranger felt it too. The shepherd's body stiffened beside him, tail rigid, ears swiveling like antennae searching for the source. And then he saw her, the girl. Blue raincoat zipped to her chin, her mother's arm clamped tight around her shoulders. They stood near the podium at gate A31, apart from the crowd. Her face was pale, almost gray, her eyes locked not on the window, not on the snow, but on the sea of passengers queued with bags and boarding passes. When she spotted Ethan, relief flickered, but it didn't soften her expression. She raised her small hand and pointed. "There," she whispered, her voice raw. "2 men, 2 bags." Ethan followed her trembling finger. At first, nothing stood out. Travelers shuffled forward, impatient but orderly. But then Ethan's gaze settled. A tall man with a black carry-on gripped tight, his knuckles white around the handle. 2 rows behind him, another man, broader, his silver briefcase resting neatly at his feet. Neither looked at each other. Neither seemed connected. But the girl's certainty was carved in stone. Ethan's instincts jolted to life. His chest tightened, his pulse spiked. He didn't hear the announcements anymore, didn't see the rest of the line. His focus narrowed to those 2 men. Ranger's growl came first, deep, guttural, the sound of a predator warning prey. His nose jerked toward the black carry-on. His tail stiffened like steel. Ethan felt the leash strain in his grip. "Easy, boy," he murmured, though his own voice trembled. He gave the signal. Ranger surged forward, weaving through the crowd, nostrils flaring. He circled once, twice, then froze with his nose an inch from the black bag. His body stiffened, his head low, ears back. The verdict was clear, alert. Passengers gasped, stepping back, murmurs rippling through the line. The man with the carry-on shifted uneasily, his face blanching. Before Ethan could move, Ranger pulled away. He wasn't finished. The shepherd cut across the line, pulling Ethan straight toward the second man. The silver briefcase. Ranger's nose swept along its side, paused. Then he gave a sharp, urgent bark that shattered the fragile calm of the concourse. "2 bags." The girl's voice echoed in Ethan's head, as loud as if she were screaming it now. The broader man stooped to grab the briefcase, but TSA agents were already moving in. Ethan shoved through the crowd, his badge flashing, his voice booming. "Nobody move! Step back now!" The concourse erupted into chaos. People stumbled backward, clutching children, dragging bags. Shouts filled the air, some sharp with fear, others angry with confusion. The gate agent's microphone squealed as she fumbled to make an announcement. Ethan's hand clamped down on the man with the silver case. "Put it down!" The man's jaw worked, his eyes flicking toward the doors. Flight or fight. Ranger leapt, snarling, teeth snapping inches from the case. The man froze, his grip slackening. TSA grabbed him, wrestling his arms behind his back. The black bag's owner shouted, trying to protest, but another team had him pinned against the counter, his carry-on yanked from his grasp. Passengers screamed, phones raised, the scene dissolving into a blur of fear and confusion. Ethan's training took over. He shouted for space, for calm, his hands steady despite the adrenaline tearing through his veins. Ranger stayed locked, his amber eyes fixed on the bags like they were live predators ready to strike. The girl pressed against her mother's side, trembling, but her eyes never left Ranger. She knew, and so did Ethan Dutt. This wasn't coincidence. This was the storm breaking open. The terminal was chaos. Passengers pressed against the far walls, their voices overlapping in a chorus of panic. Some cried, others shouted into phones, demanding answers. TSA agents worked frantically to push the crowd back, their hands raised in urgent gestures. The loudspeaker crackled uselessly overhead, announcements lost beneath the noise. In the center of it all, 2 bags sat alone on the polished floor. 1 black carry-on, 1 silver briefcase. Ranger crouched low at Ethan's side, muscles taut, ears pricked, his growl a steady rumble beneath the din. He hadn't taken his eyes off them. Not once. "Bomb squad on approach," someone barked into a radio. Within minutes, the team arrived. Dark suits, heavy helmets, the slow, deliberate movement of men who knew every step might be their last. They cordoned off the area, then began the delicate work. The black bag first. Tools flickered under the fluorescent light, precise hands cutting fabric, peeling layers back like surgeons. Ethan stood rigid, every muscle locked, watching through the haze of adrenaline. Ranger pressed against his leg, warm and steady, the anchor Ethan didn't know he needed. The lead tech looked up, his face grim behind the visor. Device. Active components. Gasps rippled through the few who overheard. The tech's words kept coming, measured and heavy. Battery source. Circuitry wired for detonation, lethal radius if it had been armed. Ethan's jaw clenched. His knuckles whitened against Ranger's harness. The black carry-on was pulled back. Then attention shifted to the silver briefcase. The girl's trembling voice echoed in Ethan's memory. 2 men, 2 bags. When the tech eased it open, silence seemed to fall over the terminal. Even the snowstorm outside, visible through the tall glass windows, looked frozen in place. Inside, layers of chemical canisters sat nestled in foam. A different kind of weapon. Not a bomb on its own, but something meant to combine. The tech's voice was taut, confirming. Each device incomplete. But together. He exhaled hard. Together, they could level this terminal. Ethan's stomach dropped. Around him, officers shifted uneasily, murmurs threading through their radios. He heard fragments, synchronized, planned, testing vulnerabilities. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't bad luck, or lone wolves fumbling with threats. This was coordinated, deliberate, and it had nearly happened here. The FBI arrived before the shock even settled. Dark suits cutting through the crowd, credentials flashed, orders given in clipped tones. Their presence sucked the air out of the space, drawing every eye. They spoke quickly with TSA supervisors, with the bomb squad commander, with Ethan himself. "Officer Cole?" one asked, a tall woman with sharp eyes. "We've been briefed on your involvement." Ethan nodded, his voice rough. "It wasn't just me." His hand dropped to Ranger's head. The shepherd's ears flicked at his name, eyes still locked on the dismantled cases. "And the girl?" Ethan added before he could stop himself. The agent's brow furrowed. "What girl?" Ethan hesitated, words caught in his throat. He thought of her blue raincoat, her trembling hand pointing with absolute certainty, her voice like a bell ringing through the storm. 2 men, 2 bags. "She noticed something," he said finally. "She helped." The agent studied him for a long moment but didn't press. Instead, she leaned closer. "Understand this, officer. These weren't mistakes. They weren't meant to go off. This was a probe. Someone's testing response times, coordination, weaknesses, and now we know they're operating in pairs." Ethan felt the truth of it slam into him like a fist. Testing. Every incident until now. The fracture, the mock bombs, the bags. It was all leading here. A rehearsal. The girl had been right from the beginning. And now the storm wasn't just weather. It was war creeping closer. He exhaled slowly, his hand never leaving Ranger's fur. The shepherd pressed harder against him, tail stiff, as if he too sensed the shift. Nearby, the girl stood with her mother, half hidden behind TSA agents. Her face was pale, her eyes wide, but there was no surprise in them, only that same grim certainty. Ethan caught her gaze across the chaos. For a heartbeat, the noise of the terminal fell away. The agents, the shouting passengers, the hum of the storm, all of it blurred into nothing. It was just her, the shepherd, and the unspoken truth binding them all. This wasn't over. Not even close. The conference room was too warm, the air stale with recycled heat and the faint tang of burnt coffee. Outside, snow still fell over Atlanta, but inside, the storm had taken on another form. Suspicion. Ethan sat at the far end of the table, Ranger stretched at his feet, eyes half open, amber and alert. Across from him sat Captain Willis, arms folded, jaw locked in 25 years of chain of command rigidity. Sergeant Monroe shuffled a stack of papers like they might reveal an answer. Beside him, the FBI liaison leaned back, sharp eyes fixed on Ethan as if he were a puzzle. Willis broke the silence. 3 incidents, Cole, and each time, this girl is in the middle of it. Explain. Ethan met his gaze. She didn't cause them. She saw them. And if I hadn't listened, if Ranger hadn't confirmed... Confirmed what? Monroe snapped. A kid's hunch? Do you know how it sounds in a report? Child warns officer. The dog reacts. No one takes that seriously. Ethan leaned forward. 2 operational devices were dismantled before they killed hundreds. That's not a coincidence. The FBI agent spoke quietly. You're asking us to believe an 8-year-old has visions, and your K9 validates them? I'm asking you to believe the results, Ethan said. That plane at D-20, grounded before a wing fractured. The bag under the clock tower, real explosives. Yesterday, 2 bombs meant to work in tandem in a packed terminal. You think that's a chance? Silence fell. Ranger shifted, claws clicking softly. Willis rubbed his temples. Instincts are one thing. Reports and evidence are another. What you're describing, it sounds like faith, not fact. Faith. Maybe it was. Ethan remembered the girl's pale face, her trembling whisper. 2 men, 2 bags. He remembered Ranger locking on both with certainty, and the bomb tech's flat voice. Together, they could level this terminal. He dropped his voice. With respect, Captain, if believing her and trusting my dog means the difference between filling coffins or not, I'll take faith over fact every damn time. Monroe bristled. That's not how we run security. Chase dreams, you'll end in a lawsuit. People will stop trusting us. They'll stop living if we ignore it. Ethan shot back, his fist striking the table. Ranger's low growl vibrated in the room until Ethan calmed him. The FBI agent studied him. You really believe this girl sees things before they happen? Ethan looked at Ranger, then back at the agent. I believe her because he does. Willis exhaled heavily. You're staking your career on this. I'm taking lives, Ethan said evenly. If I'm wrong, I'll take the heat. If I'm right and we don't listen, you'll be looking at coffins. No one answered. Finally, Willis pushed back his chair. All right, but this stays in this room. Not the girl, not her dreams. Officially, Ranger alerted. You acted. That's the report. Ethan nodded once. It was enough. When the meeting ended, Ethan bent to rub Ranger's neck. You and me, partner, he murmured. Ranger's tail thumped once. But Ethan knew the real fight wasn't just against whoever planted the bombs. It was against doubt itself, the kind that killed action before danger ever struck. In the quiet of the K9 office, Ethan shed his coat and sat heavily. Ranger curled on his mat, amber eyes never straying far. Ethan pressed his hands together, haunted by the girl's certainty. His superiors could call it coincidence, but he knew better. Ranger had always known. 5 years earlier, in a warehouse raid, gunfire had split the air. Ethan remembered flattening against a crate as Ranger lunged uncommanded into the dark. A man's cry, a clattering weapon. Ranger had stopped Ethan from stepping straight into a bullet. Another time, a domestic disturbance. Routine, until the suspect faked reaching for his wallet. Ranger slammed him back before Ethan realized. A revolver gleamed under the couch cushion. Without Ranger, Ethan would have been dead. Too many moments. Too many times the dog had gone beyond training into something impossible. And now, with the girl. Ethan thought of Claire, his late wife, who had believed in fate and timing. She would have looked at Ranger and the child and said, they were brought together for a reason. He used to laugh at that. Now he wasn't so sure. He whispered into the empty office, maybe you're saving her, partner. Maybe you're saving all of us. Ranger blinked slowly, like he understood. For the first time in years, Ethan knew what he believed in. Not the system, not reports. Ranger. Whatever force had bound the shepherd to the girl, Ethan would follow it. That evening, the airport finally quieted. Concourse B sat in uneasy calm, empty of passengers. Ethan waited in a corner lounge, Ranger sprawled at his feet. Across from him, the girl swung her legs, her blue raincoat bunched in her lap. Her mother had stepped away for coffee, leaving them alone. "You did good today," Ethan said. Her gaze fell. "I shouldn't keep seeing things." "Why not?" "Because people hate it. Kids at school laugh. My teacher says I make it up for attention, but I can't stop it. And every time people look at me like I'm wrong." Her small fists clenched. Ethan's throat tightened. He thought of his own daughter, Hannah. "That doesn't make you a freak," he said softly. She shook her head. "People don't believe me." Ethan leaned forward. "Do you know what I see when I look at you? The reason hundreds are alive tonight. Someone brave enough to speak, even when no one wanted to listen. And someone who reminds me of my daughter." Her eyes flicked up, uncertain. "So you don't think I'm crazy?" "Not for a second. And as long as I'm here, I'll believe you. Always." Ranger stirred, padded across the lounge, and rested his head gently in her lap. She froze, then slowly laid her hands on his fur. His amber eyes half closed, tail giving the faintest thump. A smile touched her lips, the first Ethan had seen. "He believes me too," she whispered. "He always has," Ethan replied. When her mother returned, the girl didn't move. She kept her cheek resting on Ranger's head. Ethan caught the mother's gaze. Sorrow, relief, and gratitude mingled there. In that quiet corner, as snow fell beyond the glass and the city braced for whatever came next, Ethan made himself a promise. No matter what Command said, no matter how impossible, no matter how many times the world called it coincidence, he would believe her, every time. The command center on the airport's secured level felt more like a federal bunker than Atlanta PD turf. Laptops hummed, maps lined the walls, agents in suits moved briskly. On the main screen, grainy surveillance footage replayed abandoned bags and crowded concourses. Ethan entered with Ranger at his side. The shepherd's vest marked Police K9. Heads turned, but no one spoke. At the center of the room stood Special Agent Thomas Rourke. Mid-40s, sharp jaw, gray at the temples, authority radiating from every movement. "Officer Cole," Rourke said without looking up. "Glad you could make it." Didn't sound optional. It wasn't. Rourke spread photos of dismantled devices, a split carry-on, wires glinting, a briefcase of canisters. "These aren't random. They're coordinated probes, testing weaknesses, watching us scramble." His voice dropped. "This isn't local anymore. This is federal." Ethan asked quietly, "Where does that leave me and Ranger?" "Perimeter," Rourke replied. "Crowd control, visible deterrence. The rest is ours." The words hit like a punch. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Perimeter? You think presence will stop them?" "He found those bags. He alerted me. Without him, you'd be scraping bodies out of rubble." "No one dismisses the dog," Rourke said evenly. "But we can't build federal strategy around a hunch and a growl. We need systems, procedures. Systems didn't find the fracture at D20. Systems didn't clear the duffel. Systems didn't flag the two men with two bags. He did, and she did." The last slipped out before Ethan could stop it. "She?" Rourke's eyes sharpened. Ethan forced the words. "A child passenger. She noticed details. Warned me." Rourke's tone cut like glass. "And you expect us to restructure national security around a child's feelings?" The room stared. Ethan leaned in, voice low, fierce. "Call it coincidence, but people are alive because of what she saw, because of what he knew. And you think I'll stand aside while you run playbooks? Not a chance. Careful, officer, Rourke warned. Captain Willis finally intervened. Cole and Ranger have proven themselves. They should be part of this. Rourke gathered his files, cold as steel. We'll take it under advisement. For now, you follow our lead. Then he walked out, agents in tow. The room emptied. Ethan crouched beside Ranger, rubbing his ears. They don't get it, partner. Some things you can't measure. Some things you just believe. Ranger pressed close, amber eyes steady. Belief was enough. That night, Ethan sat at his kitchen table, a single lamp pooling yellow over blank incident forms. The words the Bureau wanted, device neutralized, no casualties, felt hollow. They didn't capture the truth, a girl's trembling whisper, a shepherd who listened without question. He rubbed his eyes, exhaustion thick. Ranger lay near the door, always alert. Then his ears snapped up, body taut, a growl rumbling in his chest. A knock followed, 3 soft taps at the front door. Ethan's hand brushed his holster as he opened the door. And there she was. The girl. Blue raincoat damp at the hem, backpack straps clenched in small fists. Alone. "Kid? What the hell?" "I had to come," she whispered. Ranger pressed his nose to her sleeve. She dropped to her knees, arms winding around him like she'd been holding her breath too long. Ethan crouched. "Does your mom know?" She shook her head. "She thinks I'm at the library. But there's one more. Bigger than all the others." Her voice cracked. "I don't know when, but soon. It's going to hurt everyone." The words hung like smoke. Ethan's chest tightened. "How do you know?" Her small shoulders trembled. "I saw it. Fire. Glass breaking. People running. It felt so close. Like it was already happening. I'm scared." Ethan steadied her shoulder. "You're not alone. You've got me. And you've got him." Ranger's amber gaze met hers like an oath. She nodded faintly, clutching tighter to the dog. Ethan exhaled, knowing the Bureau would dismiss this as fantasy. But he couldn't. Not anymore. "Come inside," he said gently. "We'll call your mom." "Don't tell her why I came," she begged. "Not tonight," Ethan promised. Relief softened her face. She stepped in, Ranger guiding her as if she belonged. For a brief moment, the house didn't feel so empty. But her warning echoed. One more. Bigger than all the others. Later, after her mother's car disappeared down the street, Ethan stood at the window, the words still hammering in his chest. He turned to the living room. Ranger sat steady, amber eyes on him, silent question clear. "Do you believe her?" Ethan didn't need to answer. He dropped onto the couch, Ranger resting his head on his lap. Ethan's voice was rough. "We're in this till the end, partner." The shepherd thumped his tail once, sealing the vow. Outside, snow swirled under streetlights like restless ghosts. Inside, man and dog sat in quiet defiance of the storm pressing in. Not grand, not official, but enough. A vow. And they would keep it. The conference room was too warm, the air stale with recycled heat and the tang of old coffee. Outside, snow still fell over Atlanta, but inside the storm took the shape of suspicion. Ethan sat at the far end of the table. Ranger stretched at his feet, amber eyes half open. Across from him, Captain Willis sat rigid. Sergeant Monroe shuffled papers, and the FBI liaison studied him like a puzzle. "3 incidents, Cole," Willis said flatly, "and each time The girls in the middle. Explain. She didn't cause them, Ethan said evenly. She saw them. If I hadn't listened, if Ranger hadn't confirmed what? Monroe snapped. A kid's hunch? Do you know how that sounds in a report? Ethan leaned forward. 2 operational devices dismantled before they killed hundreds. That's not a coincidence. The FBI agent finally spoke. You're asking us to believe an 8-year-old has visions, and your K9 validates them? I'm asking you to believe the results, Ethan said. That plane at D-20, grounded before a wing fractured. The bag under the clock tower, real explosives. Yesterday, 2 bombs were meant to work in tandem in a packed terminal. You think that's a chance? Willis rubbed his temples. Instincts don't stand up in reports. What you're describing sounds like faith, not fact. Faith. Maybe it was. But Ethan remembered the girl's pale face, whispering to 2 men. 2 bags. Ranger had locked on both without hesitation. And the bomb tech's voice. Together, they could level this terminal. With respect, Captain, Ethan said, his voice low. If believing her, and trusting my dog, means the difference between filling coffins or not, I'll take faith over fact every damn time. Silence. Finally, Willis said, This doesn't leave this room. Officially, Ranger alerted. You acted. That's the report. Ethan nodded. It was enough. Later that night, the girl's warning still haunted him. Ethan sat in his kitchen, paperwork untouched, the house too quiet. Ranger lay near the door, always listening. Then came a knock, soft, hesitant. When Ethan opened the door, she was there. Blue raincoat damp at the hem, backpack clutched tight, eyes wide. Alone. I had to come, she whispered. Ranger pressed his nose to her sleeve. She dropped to her knees, arms around his neck. Does your mom know? Ethan asked. She shook her head. She thinks I'm at the library. But there's one more, bigger than all the others. Fire, glass breaking. People are screaming. Soon. Her voice trembled, but her words carried the weight of truth. Ethan steadied her shoulder. You're not alone. You've got me. And you've got him. Ranger's amber gaze met hers like an oath. He brought her inside, warmed her, then sent her home with her mother. But her warning stayed. One more, bigger than all the others. Ethan looked at Ranger, who never wavered. We're in this till the end, partner, he whispered. The shepherd's tail thumped once, sealing the vow. By dawn, the storm returned with a vengeance. Snow lashed against Atlanta International's glass walls, wind howling to pry them open. Runways vanished under whiteout. Inside, concourses sat in eerie silence. Only scattered travelers huddled in corners. Ethan moved through the quiet with Ranger at his side. Then his radio crackled. Multiple suspicious signals. Concourse B, Concourse C, perimeter baggage. FBI requests all K9 units. Too many. Too fast. Ethan muttered, They're not probing anymore. They're hitting us. Ranger's ears pricked, muscles taut. When they reached the main junction, chaos reigned. Agents barked orders. TSA pushed civilians back. Abandoned bags lay everywhere. Willis caught Ethan's arm. 3 signals confirmed. They want K9S divided. Divide us and we lose, Ethan said. But Willis was swept away in the tide of orders. Ethan crouched by Ranger. This is the one. Bigger than the others. Ready? Ranger waited, steady as ever. And then Ethan saw her. The girl stood beyond the cordon, her mother tugging her arm. She pulled free, running until she reached Ethan, Her face was pale, eyes shimmering. "I saw it," she whispered. "What did you see?" "Fire, glass breaking, people running, not one thing, everything." "Where?" Ethan pressed. Her finger trembled, then pointed, down the concourse. "Gate C-27, Flight 392. Ethan followed her gaze, stomach knotting. The certainty in her gesture was absolute. "You're sure?" Her head bobbed once. "If they get on that plane, everyone will die." Then her small body gave out. She collapsed, and Ranger caught her before she hit the ground. Ethan lifted her into his arms, her mother rushing forward. "She hasn't slept in days," the woman sobbed. Ethan handed her back gently. "Get her out. Don't stop until you're safe." As they disappeared into the crowd, Ethan rose, Ranger's harness firm in his grip. He stared down the concourse at Gate C-27. The storm rattled the glass. Alarms buzzed, and deep inside he knew. This was it. They ran. Boots pounding tile, Ranger pulling ahead, the concourse funneling them toward the gate. The screen above blinked. Final boarding call. Flight 392 to Chicago. The line of passengers was restless, unaware of what hovered above them like a shadow. The gate agent scanned tickets with shaking hands. Then Ranger froze, nose working, body stiffening. His growl rolled out low and dangerous. "There," Ethan breathed. Two men stood near the boarding door, coats too bulky, each with a bag. A black roller, a gray laptop case. Ethan's instincts screamed. "Stop boarding," he barked. The crowd jolted. The gate agent froze mid-scan. One man bristled. "We're late for our flight. Step away from the bags," Ethan snapped, weapon clearing its holster. "Now!" The taller suspect lunged for the door. "Ranger!" Ethan commanded. The shepherd exploded forward, slamming him to the ground, jaws locking into his arm. The black roller skidded across the floor. The second man bolted the other way, but FBI agents surged in, tackling him hard. Passengers screamed, scattering. Alarms wailed. TSA formed a barrier, corralling civilians. Ethan dropped to one knee, gun pressed to the pinned man's temple. "Don't move," the suspect spat, eyes burning. "You're too late." Ranger growled deeper, silencing him. Bomb techs rushed in, cracking open the roller. Wires, batteries, chemicals. The tech's voice was grim. "Confirmed device." The laptop case yielded more, a circuit board and vials of liquid. "They were meant to be combined," another muttered. "If both made it onto the plane." He didn't finish. He didn't have to. Ethan's chest tightened. Two men. Two bags. She'd been right. Again. FBI dragged the suspects out, cuffed and snarling. Passengers were led away in shaken silence, some crying, some whispering prayers. Only when Ethan gave the signal did Ranger release his grip, stepping back, chest heaving but eyes steady. Ethan pressed a hand to his partner's head. "Good boy," he whispered raw. "You did it. Again." The bomb squad sealed the devices into reinforced containers. One tech paused, meeting Ethan's eyes. "This wasn't a test. This was the strike. You stopped a catastrophe." Ethan nodded once. His gaze swept the concourse. Flickering lights, scattered cups, storm battering the glass. The girl's warning echoed in him still. One more. Bigger than all the others. For now, though, the truth was clear. They had stood at the edge of disaster and held the line. Together. The airport felt like a hollow shell. Hours earlier, Gate C-27 had been chaos. Alarms shrieking, passengers scattering, agents shouting over the storm. Now, silence stretched across the concourse like a blanket. Snow still hammered the glass, but inside there was only the hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional crackle of a radio. Rows of seats sat abandoned. Coffee cups stood cold on armrests. A child's stuffed bear lay forgotten against the wall. It all felt frozen, as though the building itself still held its breath. Ethan walked slowly, Ranger steady at his side. The shepherd's nails clicked softly on tile, his tail low but alert. The suspects were in custody, the bombs secured. It was over, at least on paper. But relief never came. A bureau agent had pulled Ethan aside after the arrests. "Your instincts and your dog saved lives tonight," she'd said quietly. "The bureau knows that." Then her voice dropped even lower. "But officially, TSA flagged the irregularities. The report will say, security breach contained, that's all." Ethan had bitten back his anger, truth erased for the sake of calm. "So it gets buried," he muttered. Her eyes didn't waver. "Sometimes that's what keeps people flying tomorrow. But don't think it's unnoticed." With that, she walked away, heels echoing in the empty hall. Now, with the concourse nearly deserted, those words rattled like stones in Ethan's head. Security breach contained, a phrase neat enough to hide the razor edge of what almost happened. He looked down at Ranger. The dog's amber gaze met his, steady as ever. "We know the truth. That's enough." Ethan gave a bitter chuckle. "They'll never know how close they came, but we'll carry it." At gate C-27, the screen still blinked, cancelled. The locked door stood like a sealed tomb. Ethan rested a hand on Ranger's head. The shepherd leaned into the touch, warm and grounding. Together they stood in the aftermath, silent witnesses to a night the world would never hear about. By morning, the storm had passed. Snow clung to rooftops, but the sky had cleared to a pale, washed-out blue. Planes taxied again, engines humming like nothing had happened. Travelers hurried through security with coffee in hand. Unaware, they walked across ground that had almost been a graveyard. Ethan stood near the checkpoint, Ranger at his heel, watching families shuffle forward with passports and boarding passes. To them, it was just another day. To him, it was the fragile return of normalcy. Then he saw her. The girl in the blue raincoat, her mother guiding a small suitcase. They looked smaller in the crowd, swallowed by the bustle. But when her eyes found him, everything else blurred. She tugged her mother's hand, weaving through travelers until she stood before Ethan. Ranger's tail thumped once, ears pricked. He stepped forward, pressing his nose into her hand with the gentle certainty he saved only for her. The girl dropped to her knees, wrapping her arms around his neck. For a moment she just breathed, her face buried in his fur, grounding herself one last time. Ethan crouched. She looked exhausted, shadows under her eyes, smile trembling. But there was a strength in her gaze, forged by what she had endured. "You're leaving," Ethan said softly. She nodded. "Mom says it's safer. We're moving in with my aunt in North Carolina." Her voice cracked on the last word. Her mother's voice came from behind, calm but firm. "New start. Away from all this." Ethan didn't argue. He understood. Some battles weren't meant for children to keep fighting. The girl lifted her face at last. "But if it happens again, if I see something again, will you believe me?" The question cut through him like a blade. She wasn't asking out of hope. She was asking out of fear. Fear that next time she'd be alone. Ethan's answer was steady, absolute. Every time. Her eyes searched his, then softened with the smallest smile. Ranger pressed closer, his head nudging her chest, as if sealing the promise with his own vow. She giggled faintly, the sound fragile but real. Her mother touched Ethan's arm. "I don't know how to thank you. For listening. For believing her when no one else would." "You don't need to thank me," Ethan said. "She's the one who saved us. I just followed her lead." He glanced at Ranger. We both did. The boarding announcement echoed. Final call for Flight 212 to Charlotte. The girl's arms tightened around Ranger's neck. Goodbye, Ranger. You're the best dog in the world. The shepherd gave a soft whine, licking her cheek. His eyes followed her with something Ethan could only describe as recognition. She stood slowly, brushing her raincoat, hand lingering on Ranger's head. Then she looked at Ethan. And don't forget. I won't, he promised. Not ever. Her mother guided her toward the gate, and the crowd swallowed them whole. Ethan stood motionless with Ranger, watching until they vanished beyond the checkpoint. For a long moment he stayed rooted there, her words echoing in his chest. Will you believe me? Every time. He looked down at Ranger. The shepherd sat steady, gaze fixed on the place where she had disappeared. Ethan whispered, We'll be ready, boy. Whatever comes next. Ranger's tail brushed once against the tile, quiet as a vow. That night, the house was still, the storm gone at last. Moonlight spilled silver across the backyard. Inside, Ethan sat at the kitchen table, coffee cooling between his hands. The clock ticked past midnight, indifferent to the weight he carried. Across the room, Ranger stretched on his mat. His breathing was steady, but one amber eye opened now and then, watching his partner. You never switch off, do you, boy? Ethan murmured. The tail thumped once. Ethan leaned back, gaze drifting to the window. Just hours earlier, chaos had nearly consumed the airport. 2 men, 2 devices, hundreds of lives, and a child who had seen it all before it happened. Her voice lingered in his mind. If it happens again, will you believe me? Every time. It wasn't just about bombs or suspects. It was about trust. Trust in a shepherd whose instincts had never failed. Trust in a girl too young to carry such visions, but too brave to ignore them. Trust in something larger than reason. The unseen bond that had brought them together. He looked at Ranger. You felt it too, didn't you? From the first moment she touched you. The dog lifted his head, amber eyes steady. Ethan swore he understood. The world will never know, Ethan said quietly. They'll read a line in the news. Security breach contained. And move on. They'll never know how close it came. Ranger rose, padded over, and pressed his weight against Ethan's leg. Ethan reached down, fingers sinking into thick fur. But we'll know, he whispered. You and me. We'll never forget. Outside, moonlight washed the world clean. Inside, Ethan thought of the girl, her trembling hand pointing down a concourse, her fragile smile at the checkpoint, her whispered plea for belief. She was gone now, starting anew, but her courage remained with him. Maybe their paths would never cross again. But if they did, if she ever reached out, he would believe her. Always. Because that was the bond they had forged. A cop, a child, and a shepherd. Tied together, not by logic, but by trust. Ethan drained the last of his coffee, the bitterness grounding him. Ranger had curled at his boots now, head resting heavy across them, as if to claim him. Ethan scratched behind his ear. We did good, buddy. Better than they'll ever know. The tail brushed the floor once, soft and certain. For the first time in weeks, Ethan felt the weight ease. The danger was past. The storm had broken, and though the world would never see the truth, he carried it like a vow, not about headlines, not about reports, about trust. And in the quiet of his kitchen, with Ranger steady at his side, Ethan knew that was enough. Sometimes the greatest lessons in life don't come from people at all. They come from the steady eyes of a loyal dog. Stories like Ranger's remind us that love, trust, and quiet courage can carry us through the darkest storms. A German Shepherd's devotion is more than instinct. It's a bond that heals, protects, and stays with us long after the moment has passed. If you've ever wondered how to deepen that connection with your own dog, there are wonderful resources out there that can help. Simple guides, communities, and stories from others who share the same love. I've found that exploring them feels less like training and more like learning how to listen to your best friend in a new way. If your heart is moved by loyalty, by second chances, and by the gift of animals in our lives, take a look. You may discover something meaningful for you and your companion. And if nothing else, let this be a gentle reminder. Hold your dog close tonight. They give us far more than we could ever give back.